Good afternoon. It's 1 p.m. on Wednesday, April 17th. Let's do a roll call. Staff, please call roll call.
Counselor Marshall? Here. And Counselor Young? Counselor Belcott?
Here.
And Counselor Bowerman?
Here.
And we know that Chair Medviji is absent today.
And excused.
Yes.
Right. Thank you so much. All right. Let's go to item 2, amendments on the agenda. Are there any amendments to the agenda?
There are no amendments today.
Okay. All right. Therefore, no amendment is noted. Moving on to item number 3, public comment on agenda items only. As just a kind reminder, public comment is on agenda items only. Please raise your hand, state your name for the record, and identify the agenda items you are speaking to. Staff, do we first have anyone in the room wishing to provide comment today?
We do not, no. And
Any online?
we do not have anybody online either.
Oh, wow. Okay. So no public comment for today. Moving along to item 4, old business meeting minutes 4.1 from April 10th of 2024. Is there a motion for item 4.1 minutes from April 10th, 2000?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, nay. The motion carries. Moving on to new business 5.1 legislative update. Josh and Annika have joined us this afternoon and will provide a summary of the 2024 short legislative session. Go ahead, Josh and Annika.
Can you hear me? Good afternoon, counselors and staff. Not quite sure where to look here. So, hi, I'm Josh Weiss, and with me is Annika Vaughn, and we are your lobbyists down in Olympia. And yeah, here to provide a brief report. We're talking with you every week during legislative session, so this is a little bit of a retrospective. In fact, if you'll go to the next slide, please. What we're really hoping to do here is just give you a little bit of an overview of how the session went and how your priorities went. We'll talk about a few additional legislative items that the legislature did bring on this legislative session, and then we really want to start talking about next steps for the 2025 legislative session. And please do feel free and ask questions if you, as we're going along here, you're welcome to interrupt me. General context, you know, it was a short session. The legislature did adopt their supplemental operating capital transportation budgets, which at one point when we talked to you towards the end of session, the transportation budget was a little bit in risk. And so, but they did get that fundamental work done. There were about 1,500 bills introduced that were new bills. There were a total of 3,000 bills considered because bills from the first year of the biennium were still eligible to be acted upon. They passed 376 into law, and that's actually a little bit less than on average for a short session. Maybe stating the obvious, the Democrats hold very strong majorities in Olympia in both the House and the Senate and the governor's mansion. The dynamic was set to a certain degree this year by the 6 initiatives that were submitted from the voters to the legislature. I think Annika and I and our peers at the beginning of session did not expect the Democratic majority to take up any of those initiatives, but we were pretty wrong about that. They ended up passing 3 of them. And I think speculating a little bit here, but just the process for the legislative leadership trying to maneuver through and decide how exactly to deal with those initiatives took, I think, a little bit of their bandwidth and ability to sort of desire to pick up maybe some other issues. So that's probably the one thing we'll remember from this short session with the impact of those 6 initiatives. I won't go through all the detail on this, but here's some information about the 3 budgets, and this is a good time to reference the fact that we sent you a long end of session report that has a lot more information in it for your reference. I would say the main takeaway here probably from these slides or columns is the difference in the health between the three budgets. I would say the operating budget continues to be extremely healthy. The state revenue continues to grow at a very quick clip. Added to that, they spent about $250 million from the Climate Commitment Act auctions in the operating budget. The capital budget, I would say, was much more average for a supplemental year. In addition to, so $688 million from Climate Commitment Act auctions that were dedicated towards decarbonization activities, and then about a total of $10.3 billion spent in the capital budget. That's really average for what we see. Transportation budget was not doing well. Traditional revenues that go into the transportation budget, gas tax, license fees, permits are down, continue to be down. They were down this period of time by 8%. That's really just a fact based on that we're buying less gas, either because of electric cars or because we're not traveling as much, working from home more. And that really is the projected trend for gas tax revenues. They did spend some additional money in the transportation budget, but those were federal funds, again, $324 million from Climate Commitment Act auctions, and then some other revenue sources that they approved in the last Move Ahead Washington revenue package. So main takeaway, supplemental budgets, very different shape. Expect this next year, this next biennium operating budget will probably be in good shape again, but the transportation budget issue is very much going to be, I believe, on the 25 legislature's docket in terms of what to do about revenues there. So for Clark County, we worked on a handful of main important things. The first, making sure that legislation got through authorizing an additional Superior Court judge. This was a request bill from the Administrative Office of the Courts, which is typically how these bills are run. Senator Wilson was the sponsor. The bill was not only passed, but it was funded. The state's portion was funded in the supplemental operating budget, so that was a good thing. We continued to track, and there was more discussion, I would say, on indigent defense and defense attorneys than at least I've seen in recent history. There was legislation from the Senate in particular that established a rural defense type of program for public attorneys to try and encourage them to enter public service. There was money provided for the Office of Public Defense to implement that bill, as well as there's going to be a new public defense recruitment program that is run out of the state. That bill did change as it went through the process. At one point, it included a loan forgiveness program, but that was stripped out. And it will be interesting to see going forward in 2025 if this interest that the legislature showed this session in indigent defense and the fact that there's not public attorneys to take these positions continues, or if this was sort of just a one-time type of investment. It's obviously not the level of investment that counties were hoping for, but like I said, the first time we've really seen them pay much attention to this issue at all. And then we were very concerned about funding for the 179th Street interchange. This was a Connecting Washington project, so it goes back to 2015. The schedule was maintained in the final budget. We didn't really have particular reason to worry about funding for this project. We were just worried about all projects that were funded in the transportation budget, and the concern that funding could potentially get pulled back. Although this one was far enough along, we weren't too worried about it. But in the end, ended up being in fine shape. So it was good. Not a bad legislative session from our perspective. Similarly, I won't go through all of these bullets in detail, but just the legislature continues to see a strong interest in housing, behavioral health. Those are, for probably the last two biennia have been very important topics for them. On the housing side, they did talk about and consider some really significant, what we would call bold policy ideas, such as creating a Department of Housing, They discussed a cap on the amount of rent increases that landlords could charge. They discussed increasing real estate excise tax for affordable housing revenue. They didn't do any of those bills at the end of the day, but they did spend a whole bunch more money on the Housing Trust Fund, and that really does continue to be a trend. The legislature spending hundreds of millions of dollars per year on housing through the trust fund and other programs. Let's see, behavioral health, similar, considerable amount of money they're spending and continuing to stand up new community treatment facilities, as well as additional beds at Western State Hospital. On the land use side, we actually saw some bills that from a county perspective were pretty helpful, or at least trending the right direction. Gave you additional authority to a little more flexibility when you have to make amendments to your urban growth areas. They did provide a little bit more flexibility for essential facilities within local areas of more intensive rural development, or LAMRDs. And they did also provide a 6-month extension for counties like Clark County that are in this next comprehensive plan cycle to adopt your comprehensive plans. And then finally, they fixed a problem that they had created with prior legislation relating to the Wildland Urban Interface Code, or the WUI bill. Nothing significant on the finance side. They did discuss the 1% property tax cap, but nothing came about of that. And similarly, on the policy front on transportation, the only bill that really significant worth pointing out was additional authority for local governments and the state to use automated traffic safety cameras in work zones. And that is an authority that the county now has. And if you do issue tickets from those zones using a camera, you have the ability to retain that revenue as well. Go ahead, next slide, please. So that's kind of looking backward. Now looking forward, we're really want to be reaching out, and anything you can do to reach out and thank our legislative delegation. We really appreciate it. We have great communication with the 49th, the 17th, the 18th, and the 20th. Lots of engagement with them. They're always interested in knowing and making sure they're aware of what's important to Clark County and doing what they can to help. 2025 is going to be a very significant legislative session. It'll be the long session. It'll be the biennial budgets. As I also mentioned, the transportation revenue situation is going to be on the docket in a probably more substantial way than it has been in the past. And I also, there's 3 initiatives still on the ballot this coming fall. If those pass, the legislature presumably will still be controlled by the Democrats. I think that's everybody's best guess at this point. It's not like they're going to let decarbonization in response to climate change go if the Climate Commitment Act is repealed. So there will still be big policy discussions around those topics. That's a long introduction way of saying 25 being a serious session, we really want to get going with our preparation process very early this year. And we were speaking with Jordan before, and know he's been reaching out to staff and starting those conversations. We very much appreciate that. We'll be talking with him more in the near future. I think the main point here is that we'd really like to have our priorities fully fleshed out and endorsed by you to the level they need to be, so that we can start having public conversations around the end of September. I put bill requests by December 2nd. That really would be not just ready to discuss with the public, but sponsors lined up and really ready to pre-file that first week in December when pre-filing opens up. So much earlier timeline than what we're used to. We really want to spend the fall advocating rather than preparing, so that when January 13th hits, we're really more than ready to go. We have significantly gotten down the road of advocacy for your priorities. In between there, obviously, there's an election, and we know we're going to have some new legislators. We know Senator Wilson's retiring. We know Senator Rivers is retiring. There's probably some surprises that we can't anticipate or don't know about right now that are coming up, and that's one of the other dynamics, is just significant change in the legislature coming up for 2025. So those were the main points we wanted to cover. We do have time and space here for questions. Wanted to keep this fairly streamlined, again, since we were talking with you every week and know that you've been tracking on these issues, but appreciate the time to come and wrap up, and any questions you have or anything, talk about next steps as well.
Josh, I'm going to go ahead with my questions first. Do you know, or was there discussion about in the next session a focus on law enforcement? Because I know there's been a lot of talk about that with the no pursue, and then it's been adjusted. Is that on anyone's radar legislatively?
Yeah, it certainly is. I think what you saw in the election, I think will have a large impact on what happens in 2025. You still see, even with the consideration of the pursuits initiative that was adopted, so the repeal of the prohibition on police pursuits, that you still really have a lot of tension within the majority caucuses around those issues. You definitely have members of both parties, but within the Democratic caucuses in particular, members who still feel like the focus needs to be on police reform. And then you have members that still very much feel like, public safety is a priority. I think that tension will still be there, but we'll see what happens after the election and sort of what the tenor of the electorate is this fall.
My other question before I hand it over to Councilor Bowerman is funding for the jails. Since most of the jails in the state of Washington were built in the 80s, is there any discussion on funding to either build new ones or rehab the existing ones?
So yeah, we do anticipate that, at least from a county perspective, this is going to be on people's minds. If you recall, 2 sessions ago, the 2023 session, the Association of Counties was successful in having a budget proviso included in that biennial budget to get a study and a report back to the legislature going on needs for jails across the state. That will be coming back from the Washington State Institute of Public Policy. I believe it's in December of this year. That could be wrong. It'll be at the end of this year, before next legislative session. And we do enough work with other counties to know that other counties are talking about this too. And I think in 3 weeks, about a month, when WASAC has their legislative steering committee retreat, I am positive this will be one of the discussions they pushing for next legislative session.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll hand it over to Councilor Bowerman.
I was going to ask it about jails too, but I also had a question to follow up on your indigent defense comments. What do you see in your crystal ball in 2025 on that topic?
I wish I had a crystal ball. It's really hard to tell. The WASAC litigation was dismissed at the trial court level. I know that the hope was that that would draw greater legislative attention to it. The circumstances in the indigent defense, in the public attorney sector, it's not just defense attorneys, it's prosecutors as well. It's nothing has changed in that system to relieve the pressure and the problems. So I think the legislature will still be hearing about it as they prepare for and enter into 2025. Whether they make it a priority, it's primarily a budget issue, at least from, I think, the most counties that we hear. Whether they make it a budget priority, I think really remains to be seen, and I don't have a crystal ball.
One of the uniquenesses that we face is the fact that we're switching to an office for public defense. And that entails startup costs and probably extra beyond simply maintenance.
We agree.
Josh, can I ask a question? This is Amber Emery, Deputy County Manager, on top of Councilor Bowerman's statement that she just made. we've been following closely, and Jordan may have mentioned this to you already, the case standards changes that are coming out of the Board of Governors and going to the Supreme Court. I would anticipate probably over the summer, if not fall. We have 2 sessions coming up with the Office of Public Defense for the state that they've invited all the counties to come and basically forecast financing of what it would mean to counties if these standards were adopted by the Supreme Court. So just so you're aware, and you may know this already, we have 2 sessions, April 22nd and May 10th, where council has been invited to attend and talk about the financial impact that will have to the county's perspective from those case standards changes. So I just wanted to mention that on top of Councilor Bowerman's statement about things we're monitoring very closely in that regard.
Thanks, Amber.
Councilors?
Yes, Chair, I have a couple of questions. Thank you so much for coming down so we can see you in person.
Nice to see you.
Appreciate that. I was wondering about the budget and strains on the budget, especially with the carbon capture auctions, because that's a significant amount of dollars. I'm not quite sure how those dollars are being spent now, but what impact that might, if you can kind of generalize that.
Sure, yeah. So what they did, given the initiative and the uncertainty about whether it will be passed this fall or not, any place that they spent, I'm going to say any place, there's probably some areas where they spent new auction dollars that they did not caveat it, but in the vast majority of cases where they appropriated new CCA dollars, they put a caveat in that said, one, you can't start spending until after January 1st of 25. And second, there's a provision that says if the initiative passes, those provisions in the budget are null and void. So they left themselves the flexibility that if the initiative is passed, and so those predominantly, those are revenues that were generated in 2023, and it is cash in the bank, so to speak, for the state, right? The auctions already occurred. They already collected those revenues. So they have the money one way or another. If the initiative passes, they gave themselves the flexibility to sweep all that money back into a new account, which does not have any strings attached to it. And we know it's, close to $2 billion total. That's a ballpark. And so there were, in the 2023 biennial budget, particularly in the transportation budget, they budgeted dollars for items like transit, where you're trying to encourage people to get out of their cars and onto the buses or rail, that they did plan on ongoing costs, at least for a few years. And so if the initiative does pass, they are going to have a certain number of holes that they're going to have to fill, at least to bridge them forward to figure out what they're going to do about decarbonization and also about those ongoing transportation costs in particular. So if it passes, I think with those dollars, all bets are off. It's going to be a really major reshuffle in all 3 of the operating capital and transportation budget.
I think another thing to add is I think we were anticipating them to spend that money more on specific projects, and what ended up happening is they did a lot of categorical spending. So there's a bunch of new grant programs set up through Commerce, the capital and operating budget. That's mostly how they ended up spending that CCA money. And I think that was a reflection of they had this cash. They don't know if it's going to be an ongoing funding source. And with individual projects, it's not, people don't always spend it within the time period that they're supposed to spend it. So I also think it makes it easier if they do need to sweep those accounts. They're not taking back specific projects. It's just a grant pot of money.
Thank you. I'm glad I asked that question.
Yes, go ahead.
You were on mute, but I saw you say go
Yep.
ahead. So the one thing I would want to comment on the jail topic is you know, this is probably, I mean, this is going to take some time. And so I think we need to initiate the conversation also just to make sure it doesn't happen without that we can get, you know, the whatever bill, if it goes forward, would have a clause for retroactive payment, you know, so that, because we don't know how far down the road we'll be in this process when that bill passes, and we want to make sure that, you know, we can get some funds back for what we have already invested in it to potentially. I just don't want to miss out on something because we were proactive and thinking ahead.
That's a good point, Counselor. And I will say the county is really well positioned. I think what you're alluding to is the Jail Standards Task Force, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but Representative Cheney is actually one of the legislative representatives on that task force, and he is very, very engaged. He was talking in every single meeting, really on top of this issue. So I think we're really well positioned to have our legislators clued into whatever is going to happen on that bill. It's huge policy, and I don't think it's going to pass next year. It's going to take many sessions for something like that to get through. But point well taken, we need to, especially because your jail process is happening concurrently, it's really smart to have our legislators aware of the way that you're planning your jail revisions and just aware of what the county's doing right now.
So
Any other
were you
comments?
talking about, I just want to clarify on the last comment, because I think Councilor Young was talking about our capital improvements for building or remodeling jail, not necessarily policy and standards. So if we're,
got it.
Does that make sense?
I think so. I think they're braided though. Like the Jail Standards Task Force, the recommendations they came back with, it's not dictating specific capital improvements that you would need to have in the jails, but kind of implied, like if you need to have extra visiting spaces. I don't know obviously what the makeup of your specific jail is, but for many counties, there would probably need to be a lot of changes made to the jail. But I know you're also undertaking capital improvements to your jail anyway.
Any other comments or questions from council?
Just one more. I know Jordan has been working with all of us to get our legislative priorities ship-shape, so I think we'll be able to be a lot more proactive this year. And I don't know if, Jordan, you are going to be presenting any information or if you are already talking about that, but we'll hear more from Jordan a little later in the agenda.
We just met with Jordan right before this meeting and had been talking with him about that, and really just pleased that he's on top of it and looking forward to working with him as we continue forward.
Anything else from any of the council? All right, thank you, Josh and Annika. It was great to get the breakdown of what's happening legislatively. I've been following many of these things, and it's been an interesting, short, and intense session. That is for sure. So
Yeah.
I will be seeing you in May next month. I'll be coming up with Jordan for the legislative WASC meeting. With that, thank you so much for everything that you do for us. We really appreciate you giving Clark County a voice. We absolutely do.
Sounds good. Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. Nice to see you all. Take care.
You too. Thank you. All right, we'll be moving on to 5.2 EMS District 1 Access Levy. I can't talk today. Excess Levy 2024. Chief Bryce Shirley of the North County Medical Service will be presenting information to council this afternoon. Chief Shirley?
This one? Yeah. Hey. Thank you, councilors, for allowing me the time to speak on the Clark County EMS District 1 excess levy. I'll give you some information about North Country, just some general information, kind of how we're funded and what we do. North Country EMS is one of 4 transport agencies in Clark County, ALS transport agencies, that is. We've existed since 1976 under an interlocal agreement between Clark County, Cowlitz County, and Town of Yakult. The excess levy that's being proposed is certainly not a new levy. It's one of the ways that North Country EMS has been funded for years. We've funded through a 10-year levy that's renewed obviously every 10 years. We bill for transport services. Citizens who pay into the North Country EMS service with their tax dollars don't receive any out-of-pocket billing. So we recoup funds from billing for services, and then we run an excess levy every 3 to 4 years. That makes up the third. It's essentially broken into thirds, our operating budget is. And so pardon me, my eye is itching for some reason. A little bit about the actual service that's provided. We staff 2 full-time ambulances year-round, 1 out of Fargo Lake and 1 out of Yakult. We put up additional units in high-demand periods, also during the summer when we get a high recreation visit in Skamania County, things of that nature. We open up an extra station in Skamania. And so we run approximately 1,700 calls per year, transport about 1,100 transports per year, and that number is steadily increasing. And so that's what North Country is and how we are funded in a nutshell. I'm happy to answer any questions. As I understand, this is more of a Q&A session, not necessarily a vote this week. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Council, any questions?
Chair, I've got a couple.
Go ahead, Councilor Young.
I'm wondering who bears the cost of placing this on the election?
We do as an agency.
Okay.
Historically. Yes.
And then, so a second follow-up question is, I appreciate the context that was given here in I don't know if I call it a staff report, but whatever this report is. My question is, if you're recommending placing it on the primary and the general in case it does not pass during the primary. So are you bearing the cost of both elections no matter what? Or do you, if it approves in the primary, are you able to pull things from the general to where you don't bear that expense?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It was actually a similar question was asked by the Cowlitz County folks. And historically, this is how this has always been run, just because the nature of how important the funding is to North Country. Since we operate with the excess levy funds, it would be very difficult to operate it, and certainly would cut our staff if we ended up failing an excess levy. Typically, we pass with around 80% average approval rating, and so generally what we would do is submit for the primary and secondary. If it passes in the primary, then we would remove the secondary ballot request. And so my understanding in Cowlitz County is we have 7 days to do that. I would assume it's the same in Clark County, but I'd have to verify that.
Okay, so yeah, that was my question, whether you're going to have to bear the cost of the second one regardless. Be interesting to find that out. I had another question, but it just left my mind. So I'll go ahead and turn it over.
Other questions or comments?
Yes, Chair, I have, I guess, mostly comments. Thank you, Bryce, for coming in this presentation. I have the privilege of serving on the EMS1 board and have done so, gosh, I guess, for about a year and a half. And so I just would vouch for the very good work that you do and that community support that you've earned over the years. And I know the needs are increasing. It's an interesting and complex funding mechanism because you have to work in 3 counties, and there's some specialized skills I've learned because you're going out into the wilderness basically to rescue people. So I think it attracts people to that work, and it also requires some additional training and equipment to be able to do that. So thank you for bringing this forward. I'm certainly supportive of it.
Excellent, thank you.
I have a comment. How what was the percentage of failure on this? I believe we've been told what it was before, but I need a refresher.
I don't know that it's ever failed. And
Oh,
to
it's
my
never
knowledge,
failed.
it's never failed.
Sorry about that. I'm having some issues with my eyes the last few days. So, that's good to know because I know District 6 in my District 2 also passed their levy recently, actually almost about 2 years ago, and it was pretty successful.
I've been employed by North Country MS for almost 14 years now, and in my time, it's never failed. So
That's fantastic. Any other questions or comments from the council?
I don't know if you're seeking a thumbs up or anything, but I'm certainly supportive and would trust your judgment on, getting into both elections if needed.
I am
Thank you, sir.
supportive as well.
Thank you.
So this will be placed on a Tuesday meeting, and we'll make sure you have an invite for that for council's final consideration and vote. And I think it's not next week, but it'll be the meeting after, I believe. But we'll be in touch with you on that time.
Great, thank you.
So just thumbs
Thank you.
up from the council to move it to the Tuesday next council meeting.
Yes.
All right, thumbs up.
Thank you.
Mine's up, but you can't see it.
Thank you, Counselor Marshall. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you, counselors.
All right, moving on to 5.3, 2023 assigned fund balance. Mark Gasaway will provide an overview of this request.
Good afternoon, Council. Mark Gasaway, Clark County Finance Director. Every spring, as we're about ready to finish up the county's financial statements, I come to Council and talk about the fund balance for the general fund and how we want to classify certain amounts. And just a quick reminder, and this is just for the general fund only. In the general fund, there are 5 classifications of fund balance. The first classification is non-spendable, which is basically the inventory and the prepaid amounts that are on the financial statements. The second classification is called restricted, which is restricted by RCW. So it's at a level of restriction outside of the county's council's control. The third classification is committed, and committed needs to be done by a formal action like an ordinance or something that is formally done by the council. Today, I'm here to talk to you about the fourth classification, which is assignment. Each year, we talk about the amount of fund balance that we would like to assign based on certain either projects or commitments that the council has made, but it doesn't quite rise to the level of a committed balance. So in the past, on the staff report, you can see that we have done these assignments prior. In 2021, council assigned $10 million for the architectural and engineering study for the jail remodel. In 2022, the council assigned $20 million for capital projects. And subsequently, that $20 million is now budgeted in the 2024 capital budget. So you can see that as you assign these things, then we incorporate these into the budget process. This year, I want to recommend that council make 2 new assignments. First of all, the 2021 and 22 assignments, although those amounts have previously been assigned, I would like council just to, they haven't been spent yet, at least spent entirely yet, so they are programmed to be spent in the budgetary process, but they are still residing in general fund. So reaffirming those 2 assignments. And then this year, because of the uniqueness of the ARPA ARPA grant process, we have moved just over $18 million out of the ARPA grant fund into the general fund. Now, that didn't eliminate the commitments that were already made to those funds. So those funds are fully committed with ARPA projects, but we're moving the money because, again, we're allowed to, through the revenue recovery process, out of the ARPA fund into the general fund. So I'm requesting that we assign the $18.3 million for those specific projects that have already been approved by council. The second request has to do with the 2024 budget. When the 2024 budget was passed, there was an amount of fund balance that was committed to help balance that budget, primarily for one-time expenditures, and that's about $6.4 million. So those, that funding, that $6.4 million, although it's sitting in fund balance, is already programmed in the 2024 budget to be spent. So that's what this staff report is summarizing. Again, some of the previous assignments that we have made, and then recommendation for 2 new assignments. We use this, and it doesn't move the money anywhere out of general fund. It's just a classification of fund balance within the general fund. So it's not that we're moving it anywhere else. It's just saying and telling the public, basically, we have committed, not committed, that's the wrong word. We have already assigned this particular funding to projects that we have already identified. And again, all of these projects the council has the opportunity to approve or has already approved in the budgetary process. So that's kind of a summary of what I'm asking. The staff report, is it going to go?
The staff report will be coming back on a Tuesday meeting for final consideration.
So again, I'm here to answer questions. I just wanted to introduce this to you. This is something that we do every year. So we're getting ready to finalize our financial statements now, and this just is the classification process within the general fund balance that we do every year. So if you have
any questions from council?
I have a quick question. So that's 6.4 roughly million is fully committed as well?
The 6.4 million, when you approved the 2024 budget, there was fund balance that was already existing in the general fund that was used to balance the budget. In other words, the revenues and the expenses within the 2024 budget. There was 6.4 million that was used to balance that, primarily for one-time items within the general fund. So that, you've already budgeted that for expenditure in the 2024 budget.
Okay.
It's like you had the funding available, you've budgeted to use it, and now I'm just saying let's set it aside to make sure it can't be used for other things.
I was getting it confused with the ARPA dollars.
No.
It's separate from
not
that.
the ARPA dollars.
And just, I'm curious if there are any ARPA dollars that are not fully committed. Maybe that's another session.
It is. In fact, next week in council time, I'll be coming back to council with a first quarter update, and we will have a full update on the ARPA fund as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
I know you're all excited. Just can't wait for next week. But yeah, it's on your agenda for next week. So.
Chair. You're on mute again.
I think Councilor Wilcott was me.
Go. Bad habit today. Go ahead, Councilor Young.
Thank you. Just really, I'm curious, what is the strategic, or what is the advantage, the reason why it needs to be moved from the ARPA funding into the general fund? Like, I know that we can use it for various expenses and stuff like that, but what is the real reason for moving it over?
So there's actually a couple of reasons. Under the guidance, the Department of Treasury guidance, every entity that receives the ARPA grant is able to recover revenue. And as you recover revenue, there's a change in how you report that. So in our reporting to Department of Treasury, it changes how we report that. And also as it comes over into the general fund, it has the flexibility of general fund use. So the general fund use is much more flexible than the strict ARPA requirements. And just a couple of examples, originally the 10 million that was designated for the architectural and engineering came from a ARPA project into the general fund. Now that it's in general fund, we've already reported for it to the Department of Treasury as revenue recovery, and we're able to spend it with again, council's approval for architectural engineering doesn't change, right? But we don't have to, there's much more strict requirements if we were to report that to Department of Treasury.
Okay, thank you.
Any other council questions? All right, so we have a thumbs up to move this to the next Tuesday council meeting. All right. Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate the update.
And we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Moving on to item 6, counselor reports. Do any counselors have any reports today?
I do today. Thank you.
Go ahead, Counselor Winterman.
This is on the I-5 bridge. All of you counselors have received a copy of a bridge safety white paper that was dated last Friday, knowing that it would come forth this week with a request for are there or are there not thumbs up for placing it on next week's agenda. So that will be the ask for today. Jordan and me, by the way. Just in general terms, this is not a off the wall kind of thought about bridge safety, because there are, I learned, about 5 accidents with ships and bridges every week in this country. It's just that most of them are minor. And in fact, there was a very minor collision that was actually on the Francis Scott Key Bridge right after they were assured back in 1980, when it had been around for 3 years, oh, don't worry, ships have plenty of room to maneuver in this harbor, and so all will be well. And then a Japanese ship, it was a container ship, in 1980, lost its electrical power and drifted into a concrete shield that was a support piling around the Key Bridge. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? I mean, the same thing then happened again now. So why the difference now? Well, ships have gotten so much larger, cargo so much heavier. Ships are able to go a bit faster, and bridges have gotten so much bigger. In fact, that one went to a multi-lane bridge, which it had expanded considerably from the time before. So what does it amount to that is the way in which the engineering should have caught up so that it was able to give better protection as a fender, or, you know, as a dolphin, whatever they would be looking for by way of protecting the bridge? And what is the engineering of that? And we really can't, we don't know right now exactly what that would look like. They are investigating it. As you hear on the news, probably daily, as do I, there are a variety of investigations that are taking place in around the whole Baltimore incident. So what can we learn from those? And I would maintain that we're very lucky right now to be in the planning stage for the I-5 bridge replacement and be able to incorporate some of their findings into our project. And what are those findings and are we going to include them in our planning phase? And that's basically what this resolution calls for. So, I'm happy to answer any questions either now or later if you wish to put this on the agenda, as I hope you do.
Council, do you have any questions?
Or for Jordan.
Just one question. So is the request for potential adoption of a resolution?
That would be the request when
Plus
it's
the
on
white
agenda,
paper?
yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'm just curious, like I saw some of the communication back and forth on this, and I know that we don't have any ships, at least current moment, and I think it's extremely unlikely that we would have any as large as the event in Baltimore. But I'm always going to be supportive of putting something on the agenda if the council wishes to discuss. And yeah, I mean, perhaps I'm willing to look at it for sure.
I just have a few comments. We don't have cargo ships that large. However, the comment when I read several articles about that, because it's very interesting, all that's happened in the recovery of the cars and the pieces of the bridge in itself is going to take months from what I understand. And I read about the actual crane that's doing the recovery, which it's a historic restored, rehabilitated crane that they've used for, actually went back to the 1970s to do some CIA work. It's all very interesting. But a lot of this had to do with the actual impact and not necessarily the size of the ship hitting the bridge. So it could potentially happen with some of those cargo ships that go up and down the Columbia River just based on the force. So we don't have the size or scale, but we do have the force. So, and that bridge of ours, the I-5 bridge, is very, very old. And I think everybody knows that it needs to be replaced, and we could definitely take another bridge, but I support it. So do we have a thumbs up to move it to the Tuesday council meeting?
I do.
I would be, there's definitely no harm in addressing safety issues.
And we'll be bringing this back to council time next week to have the resolution reviewed, and then at that time, we can move it to a Tuesday meeting.
And I just wanted to be sure that all the counselors do have a copy already of that resolution, right?
Yes, I do.
So you've got good time to review it. That's what's important. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council reports? Right, moving on to number 7, work session requests. 7.1, 2025 environmental public health fee schedule update, and Kathleen will be providing an overview of the work session request.
Yes, so this is an annual process that public health goes through in conjunction with our 2025 budget process. So they would like to have a work session with council so that they can gain guidance in preparation for the fee schedule, again, so that they can be fully prepared for the 2025 public health budget process.
Is there any comments from council? All right. Yes, Councilor Young.
Just, just based on what you said, I mean, this is the annual process. I'm curious if there is any willingness to look into it to make it somewhat autonomous for at least a few years or something. I mean, I don't know if it has to come to us every year, or if there's a way that we could eliminate some of the work for that department by making it autonomous and we come back and review it after a certain time period.
I think because of the dynamic changes of the budget and a lot of their funding comes in from external sources, they want to make sure that they're moving forward with council's direction, not staff's direction. So there is a lot of movement in that budget. So, and they usually do also attend one-on-ones with me ahead of time as well, just to get some individual feedback in preparation for the work session.
Okay, certainly supportive.
But I do appreciate the question of reducing meetings and possibly unnecessary meetings to streamline processes. So I do appreciate that comment, Councilor.
So
I'm supportive.
thumbs up on support. So just to clarify, Kathleen, this work session would be moved to the next council meeting as well?
No, this will approve the work session, and then they're requesting a date of July 10th. So we'll be scheduling that with Public Health too. And I believe July 10th will work because nothing's been scheduled that far out. So we'll go ahead and schedule that work session. And then I believe the 1st of June or around there is when Public Health will be joining me in one-on-ones.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. And that's a lot of advance notice. I appreciate that. Okay, moving on to item 8, policy updates. Jordan, do we have any policy updates today?
Good afternoon, Council. Jordan Bogey here. For the record, I do have a few updates for you, 3 of them, in fact. So the first one, just would like to put a bit of a bow on Councilor Bowerman's report and just say, she wrote the white paper on bridge safety. I did a little bit of research and editing and support for that, and then helped write the resolution as well, which will be now coming before council. And really the ask of that resolution is to incorporate any bridge safety lessons that we might learn specifically from Baltimore, but also generally speaking through investigation into the IBR project. And just as part of that, I want to note that if any of the councilors ever have any white papers they're working on, any research projects you're trying to do, any resolutions you'd like some help drafting prior to presenting to the rest of the council, that is always something I'm more than happy to do. So thank you, Councilor Bowerman, for leaning on me for some support for that, and just wanted to let the rest of the council know that I know that everyone's got their own policy interests, and part of my role is supporting you in developing that. So just want to say that again.
Thank you.
Then the second item I have for you today is a draft proclamation I'd like to get some thumbs up on. Sorry we didn't get this on new business. It came to me a little bit late, but this year is the 50th anniversary of the Community Development Block Grant Program, the CDBG program, which provides state and local governments with resources around housing and expanding economic opportunity. And so, basically the request from Community Services is that we celebrate April as Community Development Month and the 50th anniversary of the CDBG program. And the request would be to have this read at the next council meeting if council is amenable. So we'd be looking for thumbs up for that today. And happy to answer any questions.
Looks like it was unanimous.
Wonderful, thank you. And then the final policy item that I have on my list for you today is related to WASAC's, the Washington State Association of Counties, request for our suggestions to WASAC for their legislative agenda for the next session. And so they are just in the beginning stages of that development. A lot of that conversation is going to happen next month at the WASAC Legislative Steering Committee retreat, which Councilor Belcott and I will both be attending. But what I would like to get approval from council on and policy direction on is suggesting to WASAC that they include indigent defense issues. So working towards a fully funding or just improving funding for indigent defense services for all counties across the state. And then the second proposal that I would like us to suggest to them is related to jail capital funding and creating a more cohesive and planned process for capital funding for jail renovations and remodeling. We are not the only county going through this process right now. I know I think at least Spokane, Yakima, I think maybe Grant. There's several other counties that are in the process of updating or remodeling their jails, which were also built in a similar time frame to Clark County's. And so asking WASAC to essentially put that as an all-county priority so that the state can help fund that portion of expenses for counties. And so those two items are the ones that I would like to bring forth from us as proposals to WASAC for they're developing their whole legislative agenda, which will kind of be, it's a collaboration among what they're advocating for statewide policy and budget for all counties. And so
Jordan,
I'd be, yeah.
I can't remember if indigent defense was included in that. It's been a little while since I looked at but I was wondering if we could support that or if the rest of the counselors would be on board to make that a priority for our county. Anyone's thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the first item definitely that I was describing is improving the state's funding of indigent defense. And then, sorry, I kind of just went straight into the jail conversation, but those are two separate pieces. So indigent defense as one item, and then jail capital funding and a more structured support system as the other piece.
Okay, great. Also, I cannot recall if I even mentioned this or added it because there's been a lot of conversation around what we're going to be discussing with WASAC, but the RTC included the visioning study as their priorities as related to the GMA, but they need a sponsor legislatively to make that happen. I know that Senator Wilson has had that as an existing bill for the last couple of sessions. She made it sound like she needed some support county-wise to back that up. And RTC, which is collectively exists of all the Clark County and all the stakeholders that had requested that is on their forecasted primary things that they want to focus on. So I was wondering if that's included or does the council support that?
So I would make a distinction here between this request, which is really for Clark County, us, the council's policy direction to ask WASAC to consider putting a couple of these items on their statewide agenda, and then our Clark County, the council's legislative agenda for the next session. And certainly, we had the visioning study as a request this past session that we put through, and there are going to be a number of items, I'm sure, that are going to come through that are a request of Clark County. And I think the visioning study is absolutely fits in with that. I would say that because the third corridor is likely to exist in Clark County, it's not necessarily going to be, or maybe isn't as good of a fit for the whole association to take on. But absolutely, I have that on my list of potential priority items for this next session as well. And I think really what our challenge is going to be for the council for the next legislative session is prioritizing the top several items from the list that we'll be developing over the spring for the county, and then deciding how to best tackle that. And I think the visioning study can certainly be included in that list if that's what council would like.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, we can leave that off then. Thank you. Any other comments from council?
I'd just like to say thank you, Councilor Belcock, for bringing that subject up. I think it is, it just can't be brought up enough as a reminder of the importance for our legislative body of putting that near the top so that it begins to be realized that there is a sponsor for it going into the plan, the RTP plan. I always say RTP because that was a body in the university where I worked for 40 years, RTC plan.
Yeah, it's a play on words, RTP with the RTC.
Yeah.
Great. Chair,
Thank you,
Chair, I
Council.
just have a quick comment. Thank you, Jordan, for making that distinction between the priorities for Clark County and perhaps this region and statewide priorities. I do think that just those two items, there'd be significant support statewide for those two items. I can't think of anything else in particular to recommend at this time.
All right, so it looks like we have a unanimous thumbs up of all the WASAC issues that we want to bring up. All right, thank you, Jordan. I appreciate, we all appreciate your support, and it's fabulous. Thank you so much for all that you do to support all of us and all the research that you do.
Thank you.
All right. With that, we are moving into number 9, executive session. We will be going into executive session with legal counsel for 10 minutes to discuss the 9.1 potential litigation RCW 42.30.10 paren number 1 paren I for 10 minutes. Does anyone on council require a break, or can we go right into executive session to take us to 2:17-ish?
And Councilor Belcott, this is Leslie Lopez. Just to confirm for the record that it's RCW 4230-110. It's 110. I think you just said 10, open parentheses 1 and open parentheses little I, just for the
Yes,
record.
I said paren, actually L versus 1 because I'm having trouble seeing still. So I appreciate that
Okay.
correction,
Thanks.
Leslie. So sorry. All right, with that, we will go into executive session and return at 2:18. We have returned back from executive session. Do we have, is there a motion?
No, there's no after action today.
That's
I was
what I
just
thought.
going to move that we adjourn.
Thank you, Councilor Bowerman. It's hard for me. I couldn't hear at the very end of our executive session, so I appreciate that. No business for today, so therefore the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.